The alarm in my head was not real, but it felt real, because every eye in that training hall had turned toward me the moment the case slid open. I am Daniel Ashcroft, a first-year cadet at Corvell Station, the joint academy where every species with a fleet sends its brightest young officers to learn how to fight without dying too quickly. I had spent 3 months here being the smallest, slowest, and least impressive person in almost every room. Today, in combat history class, that was about to change, and I did not even see it coming. Our instructor was a Valari named Torn, a veteran with silver scales and a voice like gravel sliding down a metal chute. He did not smile often. He was showing us a rack of ancient weapons, one from each founding species of the Alliance, meant to teach us how far war had come since the days of metal and muscle. The first weapon was a Valari war spear, twice as tall as me, requiring 2 armored cadets just to lift it off its stand. The class made appreciative sounds. The second was a limb blade from the Ketsi hive species, a curved, serrated tool grown rather than forged, still faintly warm even after 2,000 years in storage. The third was a hammer from the heavy world species, called the Undrasi, so dense that the floor groaned when a cadet finally hoisted it with an exo-frame. Then Torn reached the last case, almost as an afterthought, and said the word that made my chest tighten. Earth. Inside was a plain steel sword, no longer than my arm, resting on a dark cushion like it had been forgotten there. Torn glanced at it without much interest. He said something about how humans left bladed combat behind quickly, how our species moved fast toward machines and forgot the old ways, almost as soon as we learned them. He said it kindly, but it still felt like a small insult, the kind that stings more because no one meant it to. I do not know what made me stand up. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was something older than that, something I did not fully understand yet. I walked to the front of the room, while 40 pairs of alien eyes tracked me like I had lost my mind. I lifted the sword with one hand. It was light, balanced. It fit my grip like it had been made for exactly this moment, even though it was centuries old, and I had never held anything like it before in my life. Torn tilted his head, the closest thing to surprise his species ever showed. I told him this was not a ceremonial piece. I told him this was a working tool, built for someone who used it often, not for someone who admired it on a wall. I pointed to the groove running down the center of the blade, and explained it was there to make the weapon lighter without making it weaker. A simple trick of design that let a person carry it all day without their arm giving out. I pointed to the edge and explained how its angle was chosen with purpose, shaped through trial and adjustment over many generations, not by accident. I told him the grip was built for a bare hand, no gloves, no machine assist, nothing between the person and the tool but skin and intention. The room had gone very quiet. A cadet named Priya Nandan, from the neighboring seat, whispered that I sounded like I had studied this exact weapon my whole life. I told her I had not. I told her I did not need to, because this kind of knowledge was somehow already sitting inside me, passed down without anyone ever writing it in a book I had personally read. Torn asked how that was possible. I said something then that I had never said out loud before, something that had been sitting quietly in the back of my mind since the day I arrived at Corvell Station and noticed how differently the other species spoke about their past. I told him that every other species here had one age of struggle, one era they called their difficult time, a chapter they moved past and then closed like a book. The Valari had their war spear era, the Ketsi had their hive conflicts. The Undrasi had their long struggle over dense, crowded worlds. Each of them fought, then evolved, then left it behind, treating those old weapons like museum pieces from a life their descendants no longer recognized. Humans never had just one era like that. We had thousands of years of overlapping struggles, one civilization rising while another was ending, weapons changing shape every few generations, because someone somewhere always needed something a little sharper, a little lighter, a little smarter than what came before. We never had a clean line where the old chapter closed and a new one began. It simply kept going, quietly, endlessly, until the tools changed material, then changed material again, until steel became circuits and circuits became something even faster. Torn asked, very slowly, why we ever stopped making blades like this one. I told him we did not stop. We just built faster ones. The silence that followed was not fear exactly, but something close to it. The kind of stillness that comes when a room full of confident people suddenly reconsiders something they thought they understood. A cadet named Owen Bracewell, sitting near the back, asked if I was serious, or if I was just trying to sound impressive in front of the class. I told him I wished I was exaggerating. I told him about how human history is full of records showing entire generations who knew nothing but conflict of one kind or another, not because we enjoyed it, but because our planet was large, divided, and full of people who did not always agree on how to share it. I told him this was not something to be proud of, but it was also not something we could pretend never happened. A cadet named Naledi Mokoena, quiet until now, asked whether that meant humans were more dangerous than the rest of the Alliance. I did not answer right away, because I wanted to get it right. I told her that danger was the wrong word. I told her the right word was practice. Every other species here had learned war, then set it aside, like a lesson finished and filed away. Humans never set it aside completely, because we never had the luxury of one single ending. Every time we thought we were done, something new began, and the lessons never had time to turn into distant memory. They stayed close, passed down through habits, instincts, and stories, even after the actual fighting stopped mattering the way it once did. That was why I could lift this sword without training. That was why my hand already knew where to hold it. It was not because I was special. It was because I carried something inherited, something quiet, something most of us do not think about until a moment like this forces it into the light. Torn stepped closer and studied the blade in my hand for a long moment. Then he asked if humans still carried that instinct now, in an age of ships and long-range weapons far beyond anything that sword could touch. I told him the instinct was still there, just wearing a different shape. Humans did not become gentle by accident. We became careful, deliberate, and unusually good at organizing effort toward a single purpose, because that is what centuries of overlapping struggle teaches a species without anyone meaning to teach it. I told him that was probably why the other Alliance members always seemed a little nervous around human fleets, even in peaceful negotiations, even when nothing threatening was said or done. It was not because we looked stronger. It was because we looked calm in situations that made everyone else uneasy, and calm, inherited over thousands of years of practice, is its own kind of unsettling. Torn did not respond right away. He simply reached out, took the sword gently from my hand, and placed it back on its cushion with more care than he had shown any of the other weapons that day. Then, without announcing it, he moved the earth display case to the very front of the room, ahead of the Valari spear, ahead of the Ketsi blade, ahead of the Undrasi hammer. He said the next class would begin with this weapon, not as an afterthought, but as the first lesson. Priya leaned over and asked quietly if I was proud of what just happened. I told her I was not sure pride was the right feeling. It felt more like understanding something about myself that I had never had a reason to notice before, something that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to surface. As the class ended and cadets filed out around me, whispering in 3 or 4 different languages, I stayed behind for a moment, looking at that plain steel sword resting quietly in its case. It did not look impressive next to the towering spear, or the grown blade, or the massive hammer. It looked small. But it was not forgettable, not really, because it carried something none of the other weapons carried anymore. It carried a habit that never fully ended, a quiet thread running from ancient battlefields, all the way to the calm, careful hands of every human cadet standing in that station today. I walked out of the room that afternoon feeling different than I had walking in. I was still the smallest cadet in most of my classes. I was still slower in the training yard, weaker in the gravity chambers, and less physically imposing than almost everyone around me. But for the first time since arriving at Corvell Station, I understood that being unimpressive on the outside meant nothing about what quietly lived inside. Humanity did not need to look frightening to be taken seriously. We simply needed someone to pick up an old sword, hold it the right way without being taught, and explain, calmly, exactly why that was possible. After that day, nobody in combat history ever called Earth's weapon an afterthought again.